own name. All right, check it. All right, chapter 2. Who now? Let's get down to the business. He asked a question. He mentioned the lords of the southern frontier. But who were they? Who were these lords of the southern frontier? See, we have to understand that Egypt didn't just start on its own. It didn't just happen all of a sudden. There were leaders and elders that came from the south. Who were they? The lords of the southern frontier, they came from the south. They came from the deep south, like I was saying. The seat of power was not in the Nile Delta, but in Ta-Seti or Nubia, okay, or Meroe. That's where the seat of power is. Matter of fact, the kings would have their power established in Thebes or Waset, not further up north. Okay, the king or the insubiti legitimacy was matrilineal. Like most 90% of say the African nations or even rulership, most of them are matrilineal. Not to say that the woman was the sole ruler, but the claim to the throne, the claim to power came through his mother, the king's mother, or his wife. And in this case, in the case of Kemet, both had to be from either Nubia or Ethiopia, hence the south. Not from the north. Not to say that their second wife was saved from somewhere else, but the chief wife and his mama was from the south. Okay? Let's think about that one for a second. Yeah? So the lords of the southern frontier, they came from the south. Basil Davidson said so. We're not talking about some random cat on the bus stop on TikTok saying that, hey, they came from the south. Scholars are saying this. Matter of fact, this guy is a European. Okay? Just in case we don't want to believe what our brothers and sisters have been saying, let me get some scholarship from the Europeans, all right? But they did come from the southern frontier. Now, Basil Davidson says the origins, on page 27, if you have the book, page 27, the origins of the dynastic Egypt of the centralized state over which divine pharaohs will rule nearly 3,000 years. The origins of the dynastic Egypt of the centralized state over which divine pharaohs will rule nearly over 3,000 years. They came from the south. Now, I pause here to look at this iconic figure here. This is Nerma or Menes. He is the first pharaoh or the insubiti of the dynastic period. Look at his face. Okay? Look at his face, look at his beard, his profile. Matter of fact, look at homeboy. He is putting that work on. Look at the other image here. Look at his face. He has leopard skins. Leopards are prominent where in the south. He has an oxtail here. He has the image of Heru there. So therefore, this culture has been duly established long before the first dynasty, before he got here. He just was brilliant enough to put everybody together. But the lords of the frontier, from the southern frontier, let's be specific. Let's get down with it. These divine pharaohs would be the Shemsu Heru, or the followers of Horus, according to the Book of Common For by Day, or in modern times, John Jackson's Introduction to African History. The followers of Heru were those lords of the southern frontier. That's who they were. It were these gentlemen, these men that rose up over time from the south to lay the groundwork to establish what we know as a state called Kemet, as an empire called Kemet. Okay? According to Davidson, they traversed the land, and some came from Libya, but the majority came up from the south along the Nile River, trading and settling as they went. But these men, these kings reigned over centuries, according to some sources, it was between 40 and 43 Shemsu Harut. We don't know their names. This is the pre-dynastic period. And let me go back to this slide real quick, y'all. Let me go back to this culture was already set in stone, as you can see. You have his crown here. You have Haru there. Matter of fact, we have the ox there, the cow, or Heteru, already established. So this is before the pyramids, before all this is happening. The culture was already there. We just don't know their names. We don't know their titles. We don't know how long they reigned, but we know that they were recognized as the followers of Horus. So therefore, the culture of Haru was already established. And so what can we say about that? What we can say is the culture of Egypt or Kemet was an African culture. It just got better over time, right? So the lords of the southern frontier came from the south. They didn't come from Mesopotamia. They didn't come from Greece. Greece didn't exist yet. They came up south, right? So, and now, Basil Davidson, he does not really stop into every major civilization, but he does note that the majority came from the south, and this trade continued along the Nile River Valley all the way until the reign of Ramses II. Okay, now this link in the same chapter, he discussed the link between Egypt, Libya, and Kush. That's pretty interesting because nowadays a lot of people would try to separate Egypt from Libya and Egypt from Kush, but this scholar here puts them together. How and why were they put together? First of all, they had a very similar culture, similar language. But another thing, economically, they had trade relationships, trade between nations that lasted for centuries, which is a good thing, okay? In his book, he mentioned there was ironsmithing in the south and silk over here. Matter of fact, Hatshepsut even mentioned some of those things, spices and cinnamons and all these wonderful things, and people with skill set all over this place. This is before state lines were drawn. This is long before that. So the queen mentioned that trading was happening. And there were other sources that mentioned this trade, but she even called this place, these places, the land of the spirit or the spirits. So it's very important to understand that there was some respect and love there. Okay. Now, Basil Davidson mentions Meroe. What about them? Because I have an issue with him separating Meroe from Kush, because Meroe and Kush were the same place, as if they were separated. The seat of power let's get into ancient Meroe though. The seat of power in ancient Meroe was in Khartoum. Okay, that's where the Nile River started to split. And they had the same culture as Kemet. This image here, dealing with Amun, the ram, and Taharka. This is a Nubian image. This is not in Luxor or Waset. This was found in Nubia. And they also had a priesthood or Kari Heb. And the culture was already established before coming to Kemet. But he mentions that the culture was solidified in Egypt. No, the culture was solidified in Kemet, in Kush, in Meroe. It just got bigger and grander. Okay, so Meroe was not a separate nation from Kush. They was one and the same, and their seat of power or their capital was in Khartoum, further into Sudan, and they had the same culture as Kemet. So we already know the lords of the south, the frontiers of the south came from the south, and Meroe was a very powerful nation as well, and they had culture as well. Matter of fact, their culture was the same as Kemet. It's like this: people in Texas, especially African Americans in Texas, we in North Texas, we may say certain things one way, like soda. But say in New Orleans, they will say cold drink. Same thing, but it's expressed differently. And so we have to understand that this language differentiation was still happening thousands of years ago. And so they're not separate, they're the same. Now, my favorite